Welcome to another Clifftop event in the Meet the Neighbors series. It's all about nature and wildlife. When you came in, there was a card on the table. You might grab one on your way out. It's our next year's program. We have 13 things planned. Seminars, workshops, guided field trips, kill honeysuckle, set fires to the woods. It's all on this card. So, I'd like to welcome you all. Thanks to County Extension Service and the Kaskaskia Valley Audubon for co-hosting this with us. An important point that should come out of today, and I don't know that Clay will mention it, is the role of citizen science. We're strong believers that all of you have eyes, ears, cameras, and follow wildlife, and we encourage you, anytime you find something very unusual, try to document it and try to report it to the appropriate people. It's very, very important. Issues like cougars and bobcats is a little more troublesome in the sense of getting good documentation. But in the United States right now, citizen science is leading the way with bird studies, leading the way with reptile and amphibian studies. People just like me and you will like to be out, see things, and document it. So I encourage you to move in that direction. Another thing Joanne told me I must remember is, if you're on Facebook, how many of you are on Facebook? Please like us. Is that what you have to say?
Yeah, like us.
Just please like us. Okay, we're going to get started. Dr. Clay Nielsen is a professor of forest ecology at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and he's the director of science of the Cougar Network, a national organization that's trying to keep tabs on cougar populations and their movements. The way he's going to do this is it's in two segments. Wait till the first is over, save your questions, ask him, then we'll take a small break and he will do the second segment. Have I forgotten anything? Board of Directors of Clifftop. I always need advice. Okay. Clay, welcome. I have to sit here because we have a technical problem.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Carl and Penn and Clifftop for having me today. Some of you may have heard me talk about bobcats and other things in the past. I've been in the Southern Illinois area for about 16 or 17 years now. But today I want to talk about a whole different issue, one that's new for those of us who are living in the Midwest, something that we haven't faced in well over 100 years, and that's these three animals, black bears, cougars, and gray wolves, potentially recolonizing the Midwest. So I'm going to talk about the broader region. I'm going to bring things down to Illinois, Southern Illinois, and try to let you know what's going on from a wildlife biologist's perspective. That's me. As I'm a professor, I like to start things out with a quiz, first of all. And don't worry about it because there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. How many people here in Illinois have seen a black bear in Illinois? Don't be afraid. 0. Big 0. I got a feeling the number's going to increase for this animal. The cougar. How many people have seen cougars or cougar tracks in Illinois? So about a quarter, more or less. Now how about the wolf on the right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, a few, but definitely got some folks out there. So, okay, that's interesting. I always like to kind of poll the crowd to see what everybody has seen out there in the woods before I start talking about what I think is going on. It's good to know that sort of thing. So, Carl, I'll just kind of point at you when it's time
Up button?
Oh, you should, I think you go down. Go down.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, let me explain about who I am. I'm a professor at SIU Carbondale. I've been there at SIU for, I'm starting on my 17th year now. I got my PhD there in 2001. I studied bobcats for my PhD work. I'm also active throughout the wildlife field. I'm a certified wildlife biologist. I am the member of the IUCN Cat Specialist Group. And my graduate students and I study a variety of species and systems. I do a lot of work in Illinois studying things like bobcats, foxes, coyotes, raccoons, river otter, deer, rabbits, beavers, turkeys, grassland birds, northern bobwhite. I do international work. I've studied I've studied jaguars in Panama, jaguars in Mexico, Maine wolves in Paraguay, global climate change issues in Argentina. I've been over to India to study lynx to study tigers and some other different species in there. My main interest really is probably carnivores though. And so to move on to my experience with carnivores and cougars in particular, that's probably my big thing now. The first time I saw a cougar in the wild was the cougar kill from Chester in the year 2000. My advisor, Al Wolf, back at SIU, called me up on the phone and said, hey, come out here to our laboratory and you won't believe what we've got out here. So we had this nice big sub-adult male cougar that was hit by a train around Chester. We did a necropsy on the animal and I instantly fell in love with the animal and have been fortunate for the past 10 years to be very, very heavily involved in cougar issues in the Midwest. I'm the Director of Scientific Research with the Cougar Network, which is a nonprofit organization, as Carl mentioned, who is interested in documenting cougar conformations. It's been good for my career. I've published papers. This is my 60th lecture outside of my classes, the 60th guest lecture, presentation and professional meeting that I've given in that 10-year span. I've been in Time Magazine, I've been in National Geographic Magazine, and every major news outlet in the U.S. and on the continent for this issue. So it's been good for my career. But I also get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cougar reports, which sometimes those things are good, sometimes it gets a little old. But I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these reports as part of my presentation. So that's who I am, and this is who's standing in front of you. What do I want to talk about today? The first part is more education. Talk about the increasing presence of large carnivores in the Midwest, focusing on bears, wolves, and cougars, leaning a little more heavily towards cougars because it's probably the greater interest here, and it's also more my expertise. I want to talk about large carnivore dispersal and why we're seeing this increased presence of cougars, and it has to do with that very issue, dispersal from natural populations. Current numbers, how many of these different species do we have in southern Illinois, and what is their legal status? These are important things to know, as people will be going into the woods soon in large numbers for deer season and so on. Then I want to talk towards the end of the educational part about large carnivore sign. What do we look for sign, and how can we tell these species against other more common species such as, say, coyotes or domestic dogs or bobcats? We'll take a little break, have a little time for questions, and then I'm going to talk about my research, the scientific part of this, where we're studying habitat suitability for these animals in the Midwest and human dimensions. So we've surveyed the public throughout Illinois to understand their beliefs and perceptions about these three species. So that's what you got in for you today. So first of all, large carnivore presence. We have the black bear, we have this angry looking wolf, and then this guy, cougar that was killed up near the Quad Cities back in 2004. Big beautiful animal. I was able to do a necropsy on that animal, and it appeared to, as best I could tell, indeed be a wild animal. So I want to talk about this increasing trend in these three species that we're seeing throughout the Midwest. But first, let's look at the current populations for these three species. Where do they exist in terms of breeding populations? We're talking actual numbers of some significance. So, starting with the black bear, we have some nearby populations over in southeast Missouri. Very, very, very close to southern Illinois. Probably the next nearest populations are up in Wisconsin, and we'll talk about that map. It's a little bit inaccurate. Black bears now almost come down to the Illinois border with Wisconsin. Wolves are a bit farther off. They're in the northern Great Lakes. We have the Mexican wolf down in Arizona, New Mexico. We've got wolves associated with Yellowstone and on up into the Pacific Northwest. And then we have the cougar. Here we have their existing populations in the green. And these are all cougar conformations that have happened in the Midwest in the past 20 or so years. So, I want to talk a little bit more about that issue. This map is put together by the Cougar Network. Again, it's on their website. It's a very popular spot for those who are interested in cougars to go to. And what we've documented over the past 20 years is about 300 cougar conformations since 1990. So there's a few things I want you to look at and understand on this figure. The areas in green are cougar distribution. And you'll notice there are three populations here on the eastern side of Cougar Range. We have the Black Hills population in western South Dakota. We've got new populations, new breeding populations in the Pine Ridge area of western Nebraska, and also the Badlands of western North Dakota. These three populations have budded off of the main body of cougars out west. What are the dots? These are our conformations, and I'll tell you what a conformation means here in a second. We've got two different types of dots. We've got blue dots, we've got red dots. Blue dots are our very best information. That's a carcass, that's a picture. It's DNA evidence. It's solid, irrefutable evidence of cougars. And the red dots are tracks and cougar kills, things that are a little bit harder to diagnose for sure. We'll talk about that in a second too. But this map alone tells the story. Why are people interested? About 1,000 miles in from the western Cougar Range, we're seeing all these conformations showing up. And the question is what's going on? Why are we seeing this? And I'm going to talk about that today. When I say confirmation, I mean the real deal. Sightings cannot be verified, so sightings don't count on the map. Confirmation is a known mortality, such as this animal killed here in Nebraska. A trail cam photo, such as this animal here. Sightings can't be verified, so that doesn't count in the confirmation list. So we're looking for hard evidence here. What have we seen in Illinois? We've had multiple confirmations of these three species since the year 2000. We have had, up until recently, 3 cougar confirmations, but those 2 red dots indicate new confirmations. This is Morgan County, just west of Springfield, where an animal was caught with a trail camera last week, or 2 weeks ago maybe, and there's also a new confirmation from up by the Wisconsin border that's thought to be an animal coming from Wisconsin. We've had several bear confirmations up in northern and northwest Illinois, and we've had a wolf confirmation as far south as Pike County. All 3 of these animals were probably extirpated from this state in 1870, and all of these confirmations have occurred since the year 2000. So we went 130 years without these animals being here, or being recorded here in a way that it would fit the rigorous criteria that I'm using, with some obvious implications. So what's going on? Are aliens dropping them out of spacecraft? No. Is the DNR releasing them? No, I'm going to look into the camera and say this. They're not. The DNR is not releasing large carnivores. This makes no sense whatsoever. Are these all released captives that we're all of a sudden seeing? Everybody's letting out their cougars, their large carnivores. No. The increasing numbers that we're seeing cannot be explained by released captives. What's happening here is this is a natural event. Animals are moving into the Midwest from breeding populations elsewhere. And we have a lot of different lines of evidence to suggest this to be true. This makes common sense biologically. There's no conspiracy theory here. This is a natural event. Populations of these large carnivores are at the highest level they've been in hundreds of years. The Midwest, where they used to be, is vacant. It's been vacant for a long time. And we have source populations where animals are coming from. So I want to talk about those a little bit. Dispersal. Are cougars and other animals making the jump, making the leap into the Midwest? Yes, that's what's happening here. When I talk about the term dispersal, what I mean is younger age, generally younger aged animals, like for cougars, they're subadults or between 1 and 2 years of age. They naturally disperse. They leave home. Looking for new territory, looking for mates. In the case of cougars, they're probably trying to avoid the big dominant male in the area who might try to kill them. This is a natural thing. I dispersed from Nebraska to New York to go to college. I dispersed from New York to Southern Illinois. Humans do it too. So this is what's happening is a natural dispersal process. In the case of cougars, where are they coming from? You remember that map? It's a long way to cougar country. Long way to existing cougar habitat. But science has proven that a couple specific areas out west are providing animals into the Midwest. The Black Hills of South Dakota, prime example of good habitat, lots of cougars, and lots of animals dispersing. And we know this from research. South Dakota State University has been studying this population for 15 years. What do they know? They know there's about 250 cougars there. The population is at ecological carrying capacity. That means it's maxed out. There's no more room in cougar country for these animals. So they're leaving. They're going out. Some of them are coming east or southeast into the Midwest. Others are heading back towards the Rockies. The researchers there in South Dakota estimate there's about 30 subadult dispersers per year that are leaving the Black Hills. South Dakota State has radio collared several animals, and they've traveled long, long distances. Some of you may have heard about the cougar that was killed in Connecticut. That animal's DNA was from the Black Hills. That's 1,500 miles of dispersal. A record dispersal for mammalian wildlife species. These animals can travel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. The Black Hills is a long way from southern Illinois, but it's definitely not impossible. What about the females, though? And I'm going to talk about these differences in dispersal characteristics for black bears and wolves as well, since we're on all three species here. And this is pretty important when you think about the likelihood of a growing population or a breeding population. You got to have males and females together. That's population biology 101. Subadult males in cougar populations are the primary dispersers. Females, though, don't disperse as much. They don't disperse as far. They're philopatric. For them, it's advantageous when you grow up to stay fairly close to home. You can learn the resources there. You kind of had a budding off territory maybe from where your mother was, but that's how they survive. That's advantageous for them. It's advantageous for males to leave town. It lessens the likelihood that they're going to breed with one of their female relatives. So, females don't go very far, and they don't disperse as frequently as males in cougar populations. However, an animal with a radio collar dispersed several hundred miles. I think this was about an 800-mile dispersal out west in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. So it is possible. And some of the carcasses that we've picked up in the Midwest have been of females. But again, much, much more interest and concern about male dispersal into the Midwest than females. What about black bears? Switching gears. So these guys are the closest to us. And I want to talk a bit about populations in the Ozarks and how those have grown. Some of you, I'm sure, are interested in this. Of course, we also have a good northern source coming from northern Wisconsin as well. That map, though, that was just up there is a little bit outdated. This is a map from the Wisconsin DNR. And now we have bear sightings and mortalities as far south as the Illinois border, and that's responsible. Here's the Mississippi River. Animals can travel down, and Wisconsin has given us a lot of things. They've probably given us chronic wasting disease in the north. They're giving us bears, and they're probably going to be sending wolves too. So thank you, Wisconsin. But this is a little bit more of an accurate map of how close black bears are to northern Illinois. Of course, as I mentioned, Missouri is a really good source, and given where we are on the map and where I live in Carbondale, this is the one to really watch. So what's been happening in Missouri, in the Ozarks recently? Well, sightings of bears have gone up considerably. Bear reports per county are increasing, and they're not only increasing in number, but they're changing in distribution. So you notice how most of the bear reports here have been in the south central county, and that's kind of where the populations grew as they were coming from Arkansas. They're spreading now, and they're spreading into further east in the Ozarks. This map here kind of shows the focal areas where bears exist in Missouri. And I'm sure there have been several bears that have got up to the river and looked over at us over here in southern Illinois and said, I might come over, I might not. Bears can swim the Mississippi River. Cougars can swim the Mississippi River. Wolves can swim the Mississippi River. The river is not a barrier. The river is a filter, but the river is not a barrier. We studied bobcat genetics in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky. We got some pretty big rivers that are separating those states, the Ohio, the Mississippi River. But we found that the genetics of those bobcats from those different localities were all the same. So even a bobcat, 25-pound animal can swim the rivers, and it's not that they do so very often, but when you have record low flows, like we have this year, you have occasions where there's some ice on the river, animals are able to occasionally get across. So I wouldn't view this as being a real serious limitation to black bears eventually coming into southern Illinois, and it's probably the first of the 3 species that's going to make it in this area. A little bit about dispersal behavior in black bears. Again, dispersal in black bears is very similar to dispersal in cougars. Males can go a long ways. They're the primary dispersers. Most male bears disperse. They're dispersing at a younger age. They can travel hundreds and hundreds of kilometers that have been known to do so. Females, again, very similar to cougars, are more philopatric. They remain in or near their natal home range. And this has, again, implications for the spread of these populations. What about wolves? Wolves are a totally different story. A different story in terms of their dispersal, which is very important. Wolves can disperse a long distance just like these other carnivores. 600 miles. The record distance is about 1,000 miles out in California. I'll show you a map in a second. However, both males and females disperse. Sometimes they disperse together. So this is important. If you got a bunch of males wandering around the Midwest with no females, what's the likelihood of population growth? Not very high. Same thing for bears. But if wolves are dispersing as a pair, babies come much more quickly. This is pretty straightforward. So it's important to understand the differences amongst these species and their likelihood of actually establishing populations. And here's an example, a well-known wolf that was followed using radio telemetry, and that individual traveled about 1,400 miles in 7 months, and this is out in Oregon, California, out west. So they can travel a long, long ways too, just like the other 2 species. So let's look back at our map. How far are we away? In southern Illinois, we're a long ways away from wolf country, but they're knocking on northern Illinois' door. Can they make it down the Mississippi River, for example? Over time, it's definitely possible. We're really close to bear country, but again, there's that limitation as far as males and females dispersing. Same thing with cougars. As I said, cougars are quite a bit longer ways away than most species. So you want to keep that in mind as we continue. So I want to talk a little bit with that kind of background. Where are we? What's the phenomenon? What's driving the phenomenon? What are the differences among these 3 species? I want to talk a little bit about current numbers in the Midwest, current numbers in Illinois. How many of these species do we have? Which I don't really know for sure. And then the legal status of these animals as they are currently protected, unprotected in Illinois, and in the case of wolves, federally. People always ask me, always, how many cougars do we have in southern Illinois? Well, I don't know. We don't have breeding populations because there's no evidence of it. We've had 1 confirmation in this area since 1860. That's the Chester Kill. We may have some animals passing through. So for those of you who have seen cougars, you may have seen an animal that's dispersing through the area. But I don't think there's to my knowledge, no one has found evidence of reproduction in the region. I also like to lean upon my own research into this area to provide some more hardcore, concrete information. We just finished up a large remote camera study in southern Illinois, and here's where we did the study. Basically, the entire southern fifth of the state, and those little boxes are where we had cameras up. We had cameras up for the winter periods of 2008, 2009, 2010. We had 29,998 camera days. So that would be 29,998 cameras out for one day, or 100 cameras out for, so you can do the simple math there. This is a lot of effort. We covered the whole area. We had 102,711 photographs of animals. We had 0 cougars, bears, or wolves. We caught just about everything on the planet that you're going to see that's here in any numbers. We didn't see any of these 3 species. What is their status in Illinois? What are the status of some of these animals? People also ask me, well, if I see one in my deer stand, can I shoot it? If I see a cougar, can I shoot it? What do I do? What if I feel threatened? Well, you're in luck. Cougars and bears are not protected in Illinois. They're not even recognized because they were extirpated from the state before the state wildlife code was developed. So they're not even recognized here. Can you shoot one? Legally, if it's on your property, yes. If you are on someone else's property and they allow you to do it, you can. But you can't just go out and indiscriminately kill the animals. If you're on a state site, you would have to have the permission of the supervisor of the site, or possibly even further up in the DNR. So, that's something to think about very carefully. I always kind of kid around that, gee, I'd like to see the evidence. Yeah, go ahead, blast away at the thing, drag it in. I'd love to see it. Sometimes I obviously don't mean that, but nonetheless, they're not protected in the state. Wolves are a different story. Wolves are very protected in the state. They're a state endangered species. They're a federally endangered species in Illinois below I-80. So, if you're in southern Illinois, shooting a wolf is not a good idea because you'll be in trouble in all kinds of ways, and thinking it's a coyote does not work. Concern about your safety does not work either. Endangered Species Act will come down pretty hard on you, so just be thinking about those things as well. Illinois is in the process of rethinking the status of the bears and the cougars as we speak. So, what can we do in the meantime? We know enough about what's going on. Most of this is accepted fact in the scientific community, not just my opinion. We know enough about what's going on to probably prepare. When I say we, I mean educators, I mean wildlife biologists, I mean state and federal agencies. Residents of Midwestern states would benefit from educational and informational efforts because we haven't lived with these animals for a long, long time, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. That's why I'm here talking today to you, is to try to give you some information that you may not be aware of. I'm going to talk about this, though, in a little bit, so just hold on, because I got more information that's going to allow us to focus educational information based on some survey work that we did of the Illinois public. Of course, rural folks and urban folks are different. There may be some regional differences throughout the Midwest too that would require educators to prepare diverse sets, different educational sorts of things for different groups of people. I grew up on the farm, and my dad is retiring this year. He's 65 years old. We grew up with cattle. If we saw a coyote, what do you think we did to it? We didn't let it pass by. We shot it. And I understand that mentality completely. People are concerned about large carnivores and because of their concerns of threatening livestock and things like that. So the rural population requires a different set of educational information, I think, than those who live in cities who aren't faced with threats to livelihood, of course. Everybody may be concerned about threat to life and limb because these animals do occasionally attack people, but it's exceptionally rare. And what we can do in the meantime, as Carl mentioned, is to keep watching for large carnivore sign. And so I kind of want to finish out the educational part of this by talking about sign. I'm not talking about these kind of signs that people put up. And this is, of course, signs out west for wolf issues, and you for those of you who follow that sort of thing, you know how divided the public is over wolves. Wolves are the most contentious carnivore on the planet. The big bad wolf is the big bad wolf, and we've been trying to kill him off ever since then. But I'm not going to talk about these kind of signs. We don't have these issues in the Midwest yet. Sightings, tracks, scat, and kills. Sightings, again, are difficult because we can't verify them. And I've heard hundreds and hundreds of reports. I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I ask them to tell me what they saw. Same thing with tracks, scats, and kills. I've looked at a lot of tracks. I've had a lot of things sent to me. These are okay, but again, they're really difficult to diagnose for sure. Hard evidence is the best. Some people say, gee, that's really heartless of you, Dr. Nielsen, to say that carcass is the best evidence, but it is. It's really hard to falsify this kind of information. Unless you're really sneaky, you go kill one in Wyoming and drag it back here, but that's a problem. Most people won't go to that length to screw with people, but nonetheless it happens. Pictures and video, of course there's problems with those too. DNA evidence, which, how do we get DNA evidence? A lot of times we're getting it from a dead animal, obviously. Carcasses are the best evidence, and of all those dots I showed you previously, probably 60 of them were carcasses that have been collected in the Midwest in the last 20 years. Carcasses are great. We can do a necropsy. Here's the Missouri Department of Conservation doing a necropsy on the animal. It's like an animal autopsy. Cut the animal open. We can find out what it's been eating. Has it been feeding on natural prey species? The one that was killed over near Chester had evidence of a fawn in its belly. So it had been eating on something that was a natural item. It didn't have a bunch of dog food in its stomach, which would probably indicate to us that it may be a captive animal. You can, of course, look for ear tags or tattoos, or maybe where the animal's pelt is wear down from laying on pavement. Cats will rake their teeth against chain link fence, so a captive animal might have some indications of that. You can collect DNA to possibly test the DNA for that animal against reference Western populations. Carcasses are great information. Pictures and video. Trail cam use has increased so much during the 20 years that I've been doing this that it's staggering. It provides us with awesome information, whether we're hunters, whether we like to see wildlife, or whether we're monitoring our property for large carnivores. However, the photo has to be clear. I've seen so many back ends of things that you know, you just can't always tell. You got to have a clear image. You must verify the location of the camera. So I get things sent. There are so many hoaxes going around. I've seen the same picture to claim to have been from about 5 or 6 different states. You know, a picture comes by me, I say, I've seen this before, and you look at the photo, probably the best one of these is a picture of a cougar that's tracking a deer. And maybe some of you have seen this. It's a legitimate photo. But you look at, and okay, I get this sent to me from Wisconsin. This is from Wisconsin. So you look a little bit closer, you look at the vegetation, and the vegetation is western vegetation. Okay? You look at the deer, and it's a mule deer. It's a black-tailed deer. We don't have those in Wisconsin, for goodness sakes. Then pretty soon, next year, the report comes, and this is from Arkansas, or this is from Illinois. You got to know where the picture was taken, and a biologist has to come out and verify. Look at the picture, look at that tree, look at where you were, okay, look at where the deer stand is, or whatever. That's the sort of information we need to verify, because these are pretty easy to fake. Another problem with pictures is that, and also with sightings, is that cases of mistaken identity. Bobcats, I get so many pictures of bobcats. I get so many reports of bobcats. 30 years ago, there weren't many bobcats around here. But now there's a bunch of thousands of animals in southern Illinois. And a cat is a cat. So a bobcat may be 25 pounds, has the same kind of body. And if you don't see the spotting patterns from a distance, you won't see that anyway. A 100-pound cougar, 130, 50-pound cougar. It's amazing how similar they look, especially if you don't know the distance and that sort of thing. But there's one dead giveaway. Dead giveaway. You're not going to see too many pictures of cougars without the tail. The tail is 2/3 the length of the body. It's a huge thing. Bobcat is called the bobcat. Why? It's got a bob tail. It's got a 6 to 8 inch tail. So, photos are great, but you got to have a clear photo. And there's a lot of other things that people are seeing. And I see them a lot in the pictures that get sent to me. Tracks. How perfect is it if we can go out and look at animal tracks? Some of you are trackers. I'm not the best tracker myself. But there are diagnostic things that we look for to tell cougar tracks from other species. And here's a good textbook photo where you can see all of the attributes that define cats versus dogs in this perfect little picture. So we've got bobcat down here and mountain lion over here, and then we've got coyote and dog in the middle here. And there are some pretty important diagnostic differences. Differences in size. The cats, they generally don't have claws in their prints. The dogs, they almost always do. Cat tracks are a little more round. Dog tracks are a little more narrow. Cats have 2 lobes here in the heel pad of their track. Dogs only have 1. So there's some pretty strong, and of course there's size differences and things like that, but it's really hard to tell the mountain lion from the bobcat unless you have scale, you know, some idea that this is a 4-inch track or this is a 2-inch track. And if all tracks look like this, well, this would be a pretty good diagnostic way to tell what critter's roaming around your woods. But for those of you who track, you know that it's not this easy. The substrate that the animal's leaving the print in is never perfect. Rain comes along and washes away your track. Snow melts around the edges. So these things are really tough to tell too. Even though they seem like a good diagnostic tool, they're not always as good as you think they are. What about scat? So I've had people send me bags of poop in a bag. You know, hopefully animal, but I don't know. Well, usually I don't get, I get, you know, all sorts of things. But hey, wildlife biologists are using animal sign all the time to understand wildlife. However, it's very difficult to differentiate cougar scat from others without DNA. We can extract DNA from feces, and we do it all the time in our research. However, it's really difficult to tell for sure. They're carnivores, so oftentimes you have hair, you may have crushed up bones in the scat, whereas a dog, or a coyote or a wolf, well, not a wolf as much as a coyote, being an omnivorous species, may have some seeds or something in its scat. But here's 2 examples of different scats from mountain lions, and they are worlds apart in size, in morphology. It's really tough to differentiate cougar scat from other carnivore species. Cougar kills. If you find a deer, or maybe, for goodness sakes, a sheep or something like that, you'll want to look for possible evidence that the animal was killed by a cougar versus some other species. So, cougar kills, they usually occur by killing the back of the neck, or sometimes they come around and get the throat. The distance between tooth marks are going to be about 1.8 to 2 inches for the top canine teeth, and then 1.2 to 1.6 inches for the bottom canines. Be much, much narrower for a coyote or something like that, or a bobcat. There's usually hemorrhaging the muscle tissue at the base of the throat or the neck. There's claw marks and rakes occasionally along the shoulders because they're going for the head. They do not go for the back end. Dogs go for the back end. Coyotes go for the back end. Wolves go for the back end. And a lot of times a kill from a cougar is neat and clean. Something that's been killed by a canine is not, because you may have multiple animals. You may have multiple coyotes. You may have multiple wolves. So it's a mess. Cougars usually will pluck the fur, would be right here on the animal. They pull out the fur, they enter the carcass behind the rib cage and eviscerate and eat the organs. They may cover the carcass and come back. So if you are out there and you find an animal that's been killed, it's been covered by maybe pine needles or leaves and that sort of thing, that's a good sign that you've got a cat kill on your hands. Now, of course, we have bobcats, so it's possible that it could be a bobcat kill. It's also possible, though, that coyotes occasionally will cover their kills too, so this is, again, a little bit difficult. Back on kills, though, my research on tigers in India involves tigers killing people, which is the most severe form of human-wildlife conflict that I'm aware of. And I've seen many pictures of tiger kills, and you might think this is the ugliest, nastiest thing you'd ever seen in the world, but a lot of times there will just be a little bite mark on the neck, and that's it. Cats are very clean killers. They don't leave a big mess, unlike the canine species. Let's talk about sign for the other two large carnivores. Bears, they've got a very distinct footprint. 5 toes out front, hind feet claws out. They're extremely distinct. You see a bear track, it's very hard to mix that up with anything else. And there's even size differences between males and females, which might indicate whether there's a male in the area or a female in the area. Bear scat, again, differs quite a bit from what you might see from other carnivores, because bears do eat berries. They eat a lot of vegetation material, and basically a bear scat is going to be the biggest pile you're going to find in the woods, and it looks like a really big raccoon scat because of all the seeds and vegetation in there. So this one is pretty good. If you find that, there may be a bear around. And then they also will scratch trees. They'll leave claw marks. Males generally do this sort of thing. I've had several pictures of claw marks on trees sent to me over the years. But really the scat and the tracks are probably the best sign for bears. Corn damage. So if black bears were to recolonize southern Illinois, we would see this sort of thing. They cause damage to agricultural crops, unlike wolves and cougars that would be more likely to kill livestock. Bears like corn. They sit down in the middle of a patch of corn and drag the corn in and just pig out. And this is what it looks like from the ground. And this is what it looks like from the air here. So, Carl. So, crop circles. Who caused the crop circles? I think it's black bears. I don't know. But this is a picture from Virginia. Look at this situation. We've got bear habitat on the edge with all these woods, and these are all spots where bears have come in and eaten corn. How about wolves? So, a lot of people see coyotes. Coyote numbers have increased considerably, but there are some pretty strong differences between wolves and coyotes. Coyote, 25 to 50 pounds. Sometimes you'll get some bigger animals than that. I know I've seen some that big and bigger. Wolves are 80 to 120 pounds. They are an order of magnitude larger. They are big critters. Some other differences, coyotes, of course, have that kind of a needly snout to them, long, narrow. Wolf has a very short, stocky-looking snout. There are some differences in their tracks, but really it only comes down to size. So you need to have scale associated with the dog. If you got a dog track, but again, a domestic dog, a 100-pound domestic dog is not unheard of. So the tracks are kind of difficult here. I didn't have time to put together a slide on the other thing that we may try to use to differentiate between wolves and coyotes, which would be their calls. We've all heard coyotes calling out there. Coyotes are more yippy. There's going to be a lot of individuals. A wolf call is loud, it is strong, it is big, just like the animal. They don't yip around like a coyote does. There's very distinctive differences in those sorts of things too. Wolf scat, again, how can you tell a wolf from a dog? Well, a dog is probably eating, a domestic dog, unless it's feral, it's going to be eating dog food. It won't have as much hair or bones in the fur or in the scat as a wolf would, but again, these things, you almost have to have a sample of it to take a DNA test to make sure it's wolf versus something else. So, to kind of sum up this issue of cougars and wolf and bear sign and evidence, really the best evidence can be gathered by looking at the site. You come to a site where you see something, you've got a track, look for scat. If you find a kill, for goodness sakes, look for scat, because a lot of animals will defecate in that general area. So looking for multiple signs of the animal in one place makes a lot of sense. I've had people call me up and say, hey, I saw some tracks I think are cougar tracks. And I say, okay, are you a hunter? Yeah, I'm a hunter. Do you have a trail master camera? Do you have a trail camera? Yeah, I've got 10 of them. Okay. Now, put up those cameras, and then you call me back when you have a picture. I've told this to dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and I've never once had anybody provide me the proof of the evidence. Multiple forms of information are really good when you're assessing evidence that these large carnivores are around.